Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the OECD webinar on improving skills outcomes through stronger coordination and stakeholder engagement. My name is Laura Znikova. I'm a policy analyst at the OECD Centre for Skills, and I will be moderating today's session. Feel free to let us know your name and where you are joining us from in the chat, which is now open. We have an hour full of content for you, including a presentation from my OECD colleagues, an exciting panel discussion, and a Q&A. So I will not take much more time and give the floor straight to Andrew Bell, Head of OECD Skills Strategy Projects, for brief opening remarks.
Great, thank you, Laura, and good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to today's webinar, where we're going to explore how stronger coordination across government and meaningful stakeholder engagement can drive better skills outcomes. The world is changing at an unprecedented pace, with skills needed for success in both work and in society being reshaped by emerging technologies such as AI, as well as the green transition, demographic trends, and economic disruptions. In response, education and training systems, labor market policies, taxation policies, and others must adapt, becoming more agile and responsive to these shifting demands. Yet the challenge of ensuring that individuals develop the right skills at the right time and ensuring that those skills are being used effectively is a complex one, requiring collaboration across a broad range of stakeholders. Governments at all levels, education and training providers, employers, trade unions, community sector organizations, and others as well all have important roles to play. However, too often, efforts to improve skills outcomes are hindered by fragmented approaches. And too often, skills policies and strategies are developed in isolation, failing to align with broader industrial and development plans. This disconnect weakens economic growth and limits opportunities for workers and businesses alike. Effective governance is therefore essential. Strong coordination mechanisms and structured collaboration allow diverse actors to align their efforts, ensuring that well-designed policies translate into meaningful action. So how can we foster better coordination skills policy? And how can governments and stakeholders work together better to move from policy design to effective implementation? These are critical questions we will explore today. My colleague Abby from the OECD Centre for Skills will share insights drawn from our thematic cross-country analyses, as well as from our practical experience working with countries to strengthen the governance of their skill systems. As Laura has mentioned, she'll be joined by a panel of distinguished experts who will discuss good practices and innovative approaches to engaging stakeholders in education skills policy. So thank you very much for being part of this important conversation. I look forward to the insights and ideas that will emerge from today's discussions. And with that said, back to you, Laura.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And as you said, now I would like to pass the floor to my colleague, Abby Sagiv, policy analyst from the OECD Centre for Skills, who will share with us some insights from OECD's work on the governance of skill systems. Abby, over to you.
Thanks, Laura. So let me just dive into today's topic on strengthening coordination and stakeholder engagement for skills policies, or more broadly, governance of skill systems. And more specifically, what I'll be discussing today is why the governance of skill systems matters, what we mean when we say the governance of skill systems, and then a few key lessons that we've learned throughout our work on how we can create strong skill systems governance. So starting with our why, when we talk about skills and skills policies, we take a whole of system approach to skills, or to making sure that the population's skills are matched with what is needed in the economy and society. So this, of course, means the education system, which provides people with foundational and the specialized skills that they'll need for work. But we go a bit beyond this to how the skills are being used. Is the economy effectively and efficiently using people's skills to encourage growth and productivity and innovation? And are skills then being further developed throughout life? And because this is quite broad, the system we're looking at includes a very broad and diverse range of actors. So of course, we're talking about governmental actors, like ministries and agencies, but also non-governmental stakeholders like employers, employees, and non-governmental organizations, and many more. And this system can often be very fragmented, with different actors working in silos on issues that are actually closely related and even interdependent. And at the same time, we also have several global trends and shocks that are constantly reshaping the needs and roles within the skill system. And by this, we're referring to trends such as the digital transition, including AI, which we could see, of course, as a shock because it's really reshaping the way we think about skills these days. Aging and other demographic shifts, the green transitions, and shocks such as pandemics and wars, etc. So governance is a big part of maintaining responsiveness to these changes. And having a strong governance structure can provide a comprehensive and collaborative foundation that can be beneficial for breaking these silos and looking at the system as a whole. And this can then help identify key challenges in the skills system and create a common vision across actors, align priorities about policy solutions to address these challenges. And all of this can lead to a more reactive and adaptive skills policies. And the importance that we're touching on here of strong governance systems really comes up time and time again when we work with countries, which we've been lucky enough to do through the years, on developing and implementing skill strategies. And when we assess the skill system in many countries, governance really comes up from our analysis and from discussions with country officials is very important. And for that reason, it's one of the 3 key pillars in the OECD skills strategy framework. And it's also why it's always a key aspect of what we do when we support countries, when we work with them bilaterally. And we've also done more targeted work with countries, specifically on skills governance, to put together recommendations that are really tailored to the specific context and country, because it's really not a one-size-fits-all area. And beyond that, we've also explored the topic more in depth through thematic cross-country reports to better understand what countries are doing, what works and doesn't work for these governance structures and mechanisms. So now a little bit clarity on what we mean when we say skills systems governance. What is it that we're supporting countries with? So through all of this experience, we've really outlined the key elements of strong skill system governance. And within this skills governance framework at the OECD, 2 very key and foundational aspects are promoting coordination and cooperation and collaboration across the government and engaging with non-governmental stakeholders. And this is what we'll be focusing on today, because this is very foundational to creating this collaborative skill system, along with, of course, building integrated information systems and aligning financial arrangements. So unfortunately, we don't have a clear prescription for every country that'll always work in every case for skills governance, because again, it's very context specific. But we have learned a few lessons that we hope can be useful to you on collaboration across government and stakeholder engagement. So when it comes to promoting coordination and collaboration across the government, which usually comes through either formal mechanisms like councils or working groups, or through even non-formal connections, there are a few things that are worth keeping in mind. So first of all, it's important to have inclusive involvement. And this means inclusive in terms of which organizations, which expertise is represented in the collaboration, making sure that all the relevant voices are involved, but also in terms of the levels that are involved here. So we want high-level, ministerial-level involvement, which can really help drive change and make sure that the collaboration is prioritized at the highest levels and the goals are aligned at the highest levels. But at the same time, we want to make sure that other levels, such as subnational governments and also managerial levels of government and technical levels, are involved, because these are often the actors that are most active on the ground and most close to the implementation of skills policies. And their perspective and concern is very relevant when we are designing skills policy. And we want to create this all-in-all buy-in from all of these levels. And here on the right, you can see Norway's Skills Policy Council, which really exemplifies this idea because it has, on one hand, very high-level ministerial level representation, even as chair of the council by the Ministry of Education. And at the same time, it includes subnational governments, and it also has a subgroup with technical level officials that can really move the discussion beyond discussion into translating it into action. A second point is that it's important to have a clear goal and mandate for the collaboration. It can really be hard to do that if we're not clear what it is we're expected to do and what we can and cannot do when we collaborate. So really having that clarified and established is very important from the beginning. It can also help move onto action beyond the discussion level and the information sharing level. And this is again exemplified here in Norway, where the council has a clear and formal formal and publicly recognized mandate that's been disseminated by the Ministry of Education. And lastly, it's really helpful to use evidence as a base for discussion. This can really help create an objective and clear foundation for the discussion. Where are we starting from and what are we working towards? And this objective sort of facts and evidence is really a good place to start. And how this is done in Norway is that inputs from the Future's Skilled Needs Committee are incorporated in discussions of the Skills Policy Council as sort of part of the discussion to move forward the conversation. Now, moving on to stakeholder engagement, this can be a particularly challenging one because governments often want not only to consult and collect information from non-governmental stakeholders, but also often they want very active engagement from stakeholders in the policy design. And this can be very hard to incentivize some of the time. So here are some ways to help with this. So again, clear objectives is very important. What are we doing here? And more specifically, what is the role of the stakeholders? This should be clarified ahead of time so that the benefits of the engagement are clear to stakeholders. And this can help incentivize participation. Having accountability mechanisms is also very important. The government should make clear how advice or input from stakeholders is being implemented. And this can be seen in the Flemish Education Council, where the government, first of all, has clear expectations from stakeholders, but it also, in some cases, actually is required to consult the council, and then is required to report back on how the advice was incorporated. Another important point is who is in the engagement. So we're talking about organizations again, making sure that the right expertise is being represented here, but also which specific people are involved. Are they people who are motivated to collaborate and on one hand have the skills and can really represent the organization, but on the other be open to dialogue and to working together with other organizations? And this also refers to the leaders of these mechanisms, like the chair of the council or the engagement body. Can they create that dialogue where all voices are heard? And this practice can be seen in Ireland's Labour Market Advisory Council, where really effective leadership has created transparent and inclusive dialogue. Secretariat support also comes up often as very important, even though it's a bit less obvious sometimes. But it can really make all the difference when the secretariat is well sourced and again has the right people. We can see this here too in Ireland, where having what we mean here by a strong secretariat is one that ensures continuity and can help set the right agenda for meetings so that it's relevant to all involved, increase transparency and communication between the meetings, share inputs that were given by stakeholders and how they were received. This is all very important. And one other point about Ireland that we think is very interesting is that the council receives great interest from the ministerial level, which this again can incentivize more participation from quality stakeholders, which in turn creates more ministerial interest. And here we create sort of a positive engagement cycle. So with these few examples and lessons, you can see that these are very valuable to us and to the countries that we work with, So we're really trying to do more to collect such insights. So one example here that you can see on the screen is from our recent or our ongoing project, Pooling Our Strengths, the Power of Stakeholder Engagement in Education and Skills Policy. And in the context of this recent report is really why stakeholder engagement is key in this specific webinar, and it'll be the focus of the panel that's coming up next. So what we've done here in the first phase of the project is we've put out a working paper that maps the various tools and mechanisms used across OECD and accession countries for engaging stakeholders in skills policy through surveys and consultations with experts and desk research. And as you can see, we've identified our main objectives for engagement, as well as different tools and approaches to achieve these objectives. And the paper has a special focus on establishing bodies for stakeholder engagement and looks at different characteristics of over 200 stakeholder engagement bodies related to skills or broader policy areas that also include skills. So we've looked here at bodies at different levels, also subnational and sectoral, which is very important, again, for getting that perspective from the ground. And the link to this working paper should be circulated through the chat shortly. And we invite you all to have a closer look whenever you get the chance. And we really want to continue this work to a phase 2 of the project with a more in-depth perspective into case studies to really understand the successes, challenges, and enabling conditions for effective engagement of stakeholders through different approaches and mechanisms. Also to provide operational guidance for doing so to other countries. And we aim to start this in the coming year. And to continue this work, we are really looking for partners to collaborate on this second phase. So please feel free to contact us after the webinar if this project somehow aligns with your organization's priorities and you would like to provide support or collaboration. So with that, I thank you all for listening. And I invite you to contact us after the workshop related to this project or to any other question that you might have. We invite you to visit our website, and I'll hand it back to Laura.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Abby. I think the presentation sets the scene really well for the panel discussion, which is next on our agenda, and which will focus on best practices and innovative approaches specifically for engaging stakeholders in education and skills policy. So I am delighted to welcome our panelists. We have with us today Ina Progonati, the Sustainability and Social Impact Partnerships and Programs Worldwide Lead at HP, Liene Voronenko, an expert of education from Employers Confederation of Latvia, Johan Enfelt, Research Officer at the Department for Social Policy Issues at the Swedish Trade Union Confederation, and Marius Busemeyer, Professor of Political Science at the University of Constance. Welcome, and thank you very much for joining us to share your insights and experiences with stakeholder engagement in education and skills policy. And just to remind everyone, before we get into the panel discussion, that after the end of the discussion, you will have a chance to ask our experts questions, and you are welcome to post these into the chat. So let's get started. And Ina and Liene, I will turn to you first. You both represent employers who shape labor demand and play a vital role in any skill system. Can you give an example of a governmental or non-governmental initiative that effectively engaged you in dialogue on education and skills policy? Ina, perhaps you could reflect on this first.
Yes, thank you very much, Laura and team, for putting this together, and thank you all for tuning in. Very much appreciated. I guess for us at HP is very much part of fundamental of who we are. So we made a commitment to equip 150 million disconnected adolescents and adults with the critical skills for the future of work. And the way that we do it is really through partnerships. So an example for us would be, we've been working with YMCA worldwide for about 5 years now. And what we're doing with them is building tech hubs, so physical centers across the world, around 400 of them, where young people can basically learn anything from basic digital literacy skills or advanced digital literacy skills, which work, including AI and so on. And the way that we're doing it, I'll give you one specific example, is in Moldova. It is a three-way partnership between the government of Moldova, YMCA, who is running fundamentally the work, and HP. And each partner is bringing to the table what is that they, are their expertise is. So for us at HP, it's obviously technology. We're using HP latest technology in this hub to equip adolescents and adults with different skills. YMCA is running the physicality of it, so upskilling the different adults, and the government of Moldova specifically has the beneficiaries. So I'd say for us at HP is really finding those great partners that help us upskill young people around the world.
Thank you very much, Ina. Liana, would you like to add on to that, perhaps from the perspective of Latvia?
So, good afternoon. 2 years ago, the Latvia government agreed that the human capital development will be the priority of Latvia, and it is mainly because half of all employees needs reskilling and upskilling today. And then we try to find the best solutions. So last year we were introduced and established the Adult Education Commission. That is some kind of organization that is majority represented by government authorities, but also employers and employees take quite significant role in this partnership. But what we understood in the process of commission work is that commission is not a magical tool to get all the answers. What skills needs each one industry at the moment. And therefore, Commission is quite commonly working together with sectoral expert councils at the moment, trying to find which one skills or which one qualifications are the most needed at the moment here in our industries. So Commission is a place where to put all the order for learning possibilities from the industries. And what we did, we stitched together these needs of learnings together with the funding. And what's very interesting is that industries choose different ways. For example, we see construction, industry chooses order of qualification, but on the other side, ICT is moving forward to non-formal education and skills from that side. So we hope this will give an efficient way how we get the best benefit of each euro in adult education. Thank you.
Thank you, Lena, for bringing that perspective from the employer side. I would now like to turn to Johan. Johan, you represent trade unions who advocate for workers' interests and we know influence labor conditions and represent another very key stakeholder in any skill system. So from your perspective, what approaches allowed you to most effectively steer public policy on education and skills in Sweden? And to what extent and in what way was the government involved?
Yes, thank you. The trade union confederation I represent is basically the blue-collar trade union confederation in Sweden with some 1.4 million members. And we have a strong tradition of negotiating how we want things to work in the labor market in Sweden. Of course, skills outcome is very critical for the employers, but it's also very important for the individual employee. So over a couple of years, the Swedish trade unions sat down with the employer organizations, and we negotiated a system that we call the study grant for transition. And we basically took that solution to the government and said, this is what we want to do. If you can provide with some funding and some legislation for this, then we will make sure this will work. So the Swedish study grant for transition basically means that the individual employee can apply for this study grant, have a leave from work for up to 44 weeks to study full-time and study something that will be valuable either for upskilling or for reskilling. So upskilling, I will do something to boost my opportunities within my current profession, or maybe even reskilling. I would like to go to another profession. And during this time, the employee will get 80% of up to 80% of the salary the average salary for a blue-collar worker, basically. So that has been very successful. And I think the key thing here was that we did this as a negotiation between the trade unions and the employer organizations at first. And I saw a comment from Tom in the chat who actually wrote that many skills models are top down, and what we have done in Sweden is basically we try to do it the other way around.
Wonderful. Thank you, Johan, for bringing that perspective and a very concrete example from Sweden. And I will close our first round of questions with Marius. Marius, you're joining us from the University of Constance in Germany. So what are some examples of good practices for involving stakeholders in the design and implementation of education and skills policies in Germany, where we know that social partners typically play a prominent and quite a structured role in shaping the public policy agenda, including on education and skills?
Yeah, thanks, Laura, for these questions, and also thanks for inviting me to this webinar. I have to say I'm coming from a researcher's perspective here, and not so much from a practitioner's perspective. So I have a slightly different perspective, maybe. But I've been looking at the German case in comparative context for some years now, and I think Germany is, of course, an example where we have a long tradition of stakeholder engagement across different levels of the system, from the local level to the regional level to the federal level even. And Germany is a federalist country, so this is kind of challenging to maintain this whole of government approach. And I would say it hasn't, it has worked to a different degree of success over the years. Maybe the first thing I want to emphasize here is that a lot of the governance regime that we kind of now observe in the case of Germany, with a very established cooperation between stakeholders, especially in the domain of vocational training. This is not going back to medieval times, but it actually was established in the 70s and 80s. So there is also the scope for institutional creation and for institutional learning. And that's maybe the second point I want to make, is that in this initial phase in the 70s and 80s, when all of this was still being developed, and stakeholders and also public policymakers were not so well versed in these practices yet, I would say you could also observe some of the downsides of extensive stakeholder cooperation, which might lead to very long phases of consultation and thereby slowing down the process of adaptation. And I think what Abby mentioned in the presentation, we are living in a phase where we are facing lots of new developments in very short time. So it's also important to react quickly. And the challenge here is that in order to be able to react quickly, you also need a solid foundation of trust and this established practices of stakeholder engagement. And that takes some time to develop. At the same time, once you have that trust, as the example by Johan from Sweden shows, it's actually much better, or it's much easier to react to these short-term challenges in ways that can respond to these things in a relatively short period of time. So it's a little bit of both. I mean, extensive stakeholder operation is good, but in the long term, you need to be able to have these institutional learning going on in order to facilitate these short-term reaction capabilities as well.
Thank you so much, Marius. And perhaps I can pick up on one of the points that you mentioned there around new developments and transformations that are really impacting societies and economies around us. And my next question, which is the same for all our panelists, is getting exactly that. If you had to look ahead, do you think social media and AI will transform the way governments engage with stakeholders, and also how stakeholders influence public policy? And what specific challenges and opportunities do you foresee? Maybe, Marius, I can turn back to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I think it's especially, I want to focus on this point of AI and the digital transformation. I think social media is maybe a little bit less important in the kind of stakeholder engagement that we have in the German case, because it happens between established stakeholders and not so much via the public, but it may be different in different systems. But when it comes to the digital transformation, that poses, of course, significant challenges, especially as it comes alongside this other big transformation, namely the green transition, which I think is also a hotly debated topic in Germany, and as in many countries. And it poses significant challenges for VAT, because it creates, on the one hand, pressures for VAT to upskill and to upgrade vocational training to higher levels of qualification, opening up new opportunities and pathways to higher education. But at the same time, it's also a big opportunity for vocational training, I think, because especially with regard to green skills, many of the jobs and occupations that are needed there often have mid-level skills. And I think so this is a big challenge, but also a big opportunity for vocational training. And I would say one recent development in Germany is this emergence of the Alliance for Initial and Further Training. Is not so recent anymore. It's more about a decade, maybe a little bit older, given the precursors of this. But it's also a new instrument that creates more opportunities for whole of government action, because it brings together stakeholders that are not part of the traditional set of stakeholders, unions and employers that had been involved in vocational training for a long time. But also it facilitates this cooperation across different levels of government. And a concrete example that one of the initiatives that kind of relate to the activities of this alliance is something that's very similar to the study grant system that Johan mentioned. In Germany, it's called Qualifizierungsgeld, qualification transfer payment. And this is very recent, and I think that could also be, as in other countries like Austria and Sweden, could be a good opportunity to keep investing in skills and to allow individual people to make that decision which kind of skills they want to invest in, with the support from the government.
Thank you, Marius. Johan, would you like to also reflect on this question, AI and social media and the impact on stakeholder engagement?
I think that AI, of course, has a big impact on the labor market as such, and I think that is basically the main cause we see. Now, we see that in some occupations, AI will change the way we work, and thus will create a demand for reskilling or upskilling for a lot of the people working in those occupations, and that's where this study grant for translation that we have negotiated, that we hope that will be one of the solutions. I agree on what was said about the social media. That may be more or something where we can communicate, and that changes over time, of course. We communicate different with our members through social media today than what we did 2 years ago, and we will probably be very different in 2 years more. But I think that AI is one of the factors that has been behind our negotiations, that we need to make sure that everybody in the workforce can relearn or learn new things during their work life.
Thank you, Johan. Liene and Ina, would you also like to share your perspectives? Liene, perhaps you want to go first.
Yes, I will share the previous messages, and we have faced with a need to operate huge amount of data and to be flexible and fast in this process. So I think data about the professions of employees, migration between sectors, and different other aspects that are really important for us to plan the education, to plan necessary skills, comes into force when we have this data and can use with the AI tools. And this should be the priority of us, to make more objective scenarios of what will become later on the actions we are doing in education today. So fully agree with previous messages. I look forward for AI tools and our work and collaboration on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Liene. And Ina, please share your thoughts as well.
Laura, obviously very well said by the previous panelist. From my perspective, AI is here to stay. It's already very much part of the employment. From us at HP, I guess, a couple of things that I'd want to highlight. One of the things, obviously, as I mentioned, our bread and butter, we have a complete fleet that we have integrated AI. The second one I would say is we're working with a lot of different partners to create content to, in a way, destigmatize what it means to use AI, and how can we make AI knowledge more understandable for anyone, right? People who are trying to upskill themselves. And as I said, very much it's part of our goal. Our goal is to reach 150 million people, and AI is one of those skills that we're very much working towards upskilling the younger generations on. That's pretty much it from my end. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Ina, and thank you to all our panelists for your valuable reflections, which I think are so useful for informing our thinking about the future of stakeholder engagement, especially now in the context of the ongoing and significant societal transformations that we see around us. So now I would like to turn to the questions from the audience. And thank you everyone for sending us your questions in the chat, and also to everyone who submitted questions to us prior to the webinar. We have a lot of questions for our panelists, so perhaps I can start with you, Marius. One of our participants would like to know, what is a critical success factor of an effective skill system governance model, in your opinion?
That's a very good question, and it's not so easy to answer. But I think if you look at this from the labor market perspective, I think the answer would be that you need to have a governance regime that produces the skills that are needed on the labor market for employers to be able to compete successfully. But also, I would say there's a social inclusion aspect. So you need to have a regime that allows people that lack certain skills, or gives people that lack these skills an opportunity to get those skills, to obtain those skills, and to make also effective use of the skills that are available in the population at large, so to speak. So it's always a little bit of this combination between effectiveness in terms of the employer demand, but also social inclusion in terms of what the skill formation system can do to facilitate, for instance, low levels of youth unemployment. Because if you have unemployment experiences already very early in your employment career, it will be very hard to keep you employable for longer periods of time. That also then in the long term leads to an even higher loss of human capital. So I think it's very important, especially here, to intervene as early as possible via good skill formation institutions to make sure that everyone has the skills that he or she needs to be able to succeed.
Thank you, Marius. Perhaps I can pick up on that and ask Ina. We have a question for you around a demand-driven skill system. So, from your perspective, how can employers and higher education institutions and governments best collaborate to create such a demand-driven skill system?
Thank you, Laura. Very good question. I mean, I will go back to collaboration, right? For us is figuring out what is the need and building those partnerships where in the end, we're looking at what is it a young person really needs, right? They need A, B, C, D skills. Then we should get together as all stakeholders and figure out the easiest way to get that solution fundamentally to those beneficiaries. I'd say successful partnerships is probably my answer for this.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ina. I would also like to call on Liane to perhaps share with us a bit of her sectoral expertise on this next question, because we are being asked, what is the key ingredient for overcoming coordination challenges between different sectors, specifically with respect to skills development?
Yes, indeed, this is quite a challenging aspect for all the industries. And still, from my experience, I can say that while we are keeping in mind our overall goal to have economic growth in all the country, we understand that we will need to make these compromises among different sectors. And to move forward from talking to doing, it's usually helpful to have direct KPIs we want to reach by educational process or programs. So KPIs and clear moving forward to common goal and common results, I think this is an answer of effective element. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liane. And we also have a question for Johan, which is a very interesting one. Perhaps you can share your perspectives on this one. What do you think is the most effective strategy for addressing potential deadlocks in stakeholder consultations where there may be diverging interests between multiple stakeholders?
Yeah, in our context, I would say that when we make an agreement when the social partners make an agreement, the trade unions and the employer organizations, when we agree, and in Sweden, we have a strong position in the labor market, and that means that then we can go to the government and tell them that we agree on this. If you make the legislation necessary, if you provide the funding, we provide some funding through our collective bargaining agreements, then there's a better chance that this will work. And that the government knows that. It's much more difficult for them to come up with some solution themselves and then hope that it works. the social partners we already have since many years, what we call transition organizations that we pay for ourselves through our collective bargaining agreements. And those are designed to help employees that in some way lose their job and need help to get either training or just help to find their path to a new occupation. So I think the success factor for us is being is the negotiations between the social partners.
Thank you very much, Johan. Those were very interesting reflections, more so focusing on the questions that we received from our participants on stakeholder engagement in education and skills policy. But perhaps I can briefly turn to one of my colleagues from the OECD, because we also got a very interesting questions about cross-governmental coordination of skills policy, which I think would be very interesting for our audience to hear about and perhaps complement the discussion on stakeholder engagement. So Andrew, Abby spoke in her presentation about the multitude of actors who are involved in skills policy, both governmental and non-governmental stakeholders. So bearing that in mind, do you think we need a separate skills ministry in government?
Thanks, Laura. So creating a separate skills ministry is an interesting idea. I think the effectiveness of such an approach would depend on the specific context of the country. I can imagine, for example, that a centralized skills ministry could offer advantages in the context where coordination among key portfolios such as education, labor markets, and immigration is perhaps weak. In these situations, a dedicated ministry can promote coherence and enhance the visibility of skills policy on the broader public policy agenda. And this could be especially valuable, I suppose, in countries where skills policy has previously not received significant attention. On the other hand, shifting a significant share of responsibility for skills policy to a single ministry could carry some risks of disengagement when ministries such as those overseeing economy, taxation, industry, and social development, as well as those line ministries supporting sectors facing critical skills shortages, no longer see themselves as key stakeholders. Skills policy may lose priority amid competing demands. Furthermore, a dedicated skills ministry could be hobbled by administrative complexity. So, for example, the sheer breadth of its mandate may make it difficult to manage effectively, I suppose. Ultimately, I think the optimal governance arrangement depends on the country's unique situation. I suppose not surprising to hear me say that. The context does matter. Some countries may benefit from establishing a dedicated skills ministry, while others might achieve better outcomes by strengthening collaboration among existing ministries, departments, and agencies responsible for different aspects of skills policy. Not surprisingly, many countries pursue a policy somewhere between these two extremes. I'll give you an example in Ireland, DeFerris, the Department of Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation, and Science. It combines a number of skills relevant portfolios, but not all of them. For example, it is not responsible for initial education and immigration. So I suppose it depends on what you mean by a skills ministry, but certainly having some combination of taking in some of those portfolios that we consider to be skills portfolios into a single entity could perhaps improve coherence and coordination. But again, as always, context matters, and what works in one country may not work well in another country. So all that needs to be taken into consideration. That's a good question. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrew. And again, we get into the topic of the multiple actors that are often involved when it comes to coordination, but also stakeholder engagement. And I would like to reflect on this topic a bit more with our next question. Perhaps I can address this one to Marius. In the context of governments establishing bodies for effective stakeholder engagement, they often face the question of who exactly do we involve, who exactly do we invite to be on board. And there's many different actors in the skill system who could potentially have a valuable and insightful perspective to share. So do you have any thoughts or reflections on how governments can balance, on the one hand, being inclusive in their approach, but also on the other hand, making sure those bodies function effectively and efficiently and the meetings lead to tangible outcomes?
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Again, this is a very important point, and I think it connects very well to what Andrew just said about the challenge of skills policy more broadly, I would say, because it is a cross-cutting topic, right? It's not so easy to classify compared to some other policies like health or pensions or so on, because it cuts across different areas. It cuts across obviously education and training, but it also is related to immigration, higher education, labor market policy. So that's what makes it so challenging to effectively identify, the right mix of stakeholders to engage with. And like Andrew said, I think it very much depends on the country context, and therefore it's very important that the OECD and other institutions collect this country-specific information on this, because I would be hard-pressed to just come up with a one-sentence statement as to where to draw exactly the boundaries. I think every country has to find the right balance there. But I do think there is a little bit of a tension, or potentially even a trade-off between the inclusiveness on the one hand and also the effectiveness. So I think that if you completely deny that potential tension, that would be misleading. So I think you have to be aware of the fact that the more people or the more stakeholders you involve, this will have an effect on the kind of processes you have and potentially on the outcomes you might have. So I think in the German case, more concretely, I think the experience was that the kind of traditional governance regime with employers and unions and the main bodies of vocational training, that was too limited in order to be able to deal effectively with the current challenges. So this is why this Alliance for Initial and Further Training included, for instance, stakeholders that were more active in the domain of migration policy, but also this coordination between the federal and the state levels that was kind of weakly developed in the previous or in the more traditional part of the governance system. So thereby the alliance kind of plugs the holes that the traditional governance regime basically has. But the downside is that in terms of the outcomes, it is a little bit less concrete, because the traditional governance institutions, they pass the training regulations, the actual regulations, and this new alliance is more in charge of softer policy instruments of coordination and potential some support schemes like the qualification subsidy that I mentioned. But so I think at least when you think about this, and when as a policymaker and try to design the system, you have to be aware of these potential tensions, and then you have to find the right balance, country by country, I would say.
That's great. Thank you, Marius. I wonder if Johan also has reflections on this or any thoughts.
Yeah, I would say this thing about getting the right balance, because when it comes to, of course, we're a blue-collar union, so it's mostly vocational training, and everybody knows about the problems with when government tries to initiate a lot of apprenticeships, and sometimes it doesn't work. You get the wrong employers doing the wrong things, and people don't get the training they need. But if you have a good balance between employers and unions overseeing those programs, like we have in I don't say it works perfectly every place, but we have from the national level down to the local level, there are bodies that are overlooking vocational training with representatives both from the employers and the trade unions, and this, when this works, this guarantees that the employers, they can see that they get skills for the future, and the trade unions can guarantee that this is actually training, not people working instead of getting training, and they can also have a mutual interest in having good quality of the vocational training. So I think involving the social partners here is very good, and especially at the local level, they also know a lot about the local labor market. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johan. And I would like to bring the next question that we received back to some of the points that Abby mentioned in her presentation, and that is some of the enabling factors that make for successful and also sustained stakeholder engagement in education and skills policy. Abby mentioned in her presentation, it's very important to have clear outcomes of engagement structures or bodies, and at the same time, accountability mechanisms to make sure that stakeholders, including employers, trade unions, but also NGOs, civil society organizations, those actors that are involved, know where their input and advice is going. So I would like to get the perspectives of Liene and then Ina on this question. Do you think those are some of the most important enablers that will make you, from your perspective as an employer, want to engage meaningfully and in a sustained fashion with a governmental initiative on education and skills policy, or would there be others that you would also add?
So, bringing on the floor the question why the employers are engaged in this whole process, I would say that from our perspective, while we are seeing that the result of our involvement brings good results for industries, we are always open for cooperation. And I would say that even sometimes our sectoral experts says that they would like to bring more expertise in decision-making process and not to sit at the table where the decisions are made. So if you ask whether expertise is the right answer to all these problems, I think it's a combination of cooperation and really clear competence of all the partners and parties at the table.
Thank you, Liene. What about you, Ina?
Could not agree more. I think it's definitely a matter of a conversation, and I agree with what Abby said. I think it's important to have a good understanding of what is it we're trying to achieve, right? We're talking about upskilling, we're talking about all of these things, and for me, it really comes down to, fundamentally what is the KPI that we all as all stakeholders agree, and then how do we get to that? Sometimes we have all of these big ideas and not necessarily that little execution. I think that's the part that would make it easier for employers.
Thank you. Thank you both. I have a very interesting question, and I would like to invite all our panelists to perhaps briefly reflect on this one. And one of our participants would like to know, how can stakeholder engagement create smoother connections between different types and also stages of education? When we talk about skills policy, we at the Center for Skills take a life course, a holistic perspective on what skills mean. So how can stakeholder engagement create smoother connections between these different types and stages of education? Perhaps Johan or Marius, you may want to kick us off.
Well, I can start. I mean, this is, I think, a traditional problem in Germany is this coordination between different sectors of the education system because of the federalist structure. Education is in the hands of the state governments, and they are very keen on protecting their decision-making rights in that respect. But vocational training, to some extent, is different because the social partners had been pushing for a more centralized approach here because they cared for, or they wanted to have training regulations that are the same for everybody in the whole of Germany. So there was always this tension in vocational training versus higher education, for instance, but also between higher vocational training and general schools. And that's exactly where this alliance comes in, because before these were completely disconnected areas, I would say. And in dual apprenticeship training, they had to cooperate to some extent because the schools or the state governments are in charge of the school-based part of vocational training, and the firms are in charge of the firm-based part of training, which is then also coordinated by the federal ministry. So it's kind of complicated. But this alliance made that easier. And I think the secret of success, if you want to call it like that, is that in that sense, it was a kind of informal consultation body. It was not. So I would generally agree, like Abby said, you always need to have a concrete goal, what you want to do. But in this sense, it was just important as a first step to create some kind of forum for discussion and engagement that is doesn't have a formal task that it needs to do. So I think maybe that's also different in different countries, but I think there it helps to create some trust, and I think this trust issue is extremely important to smooth out these potential tensions there. Also trust between individual people in charge of these individual areas, but also between different stakeholders across, in a broader sense. So in that sense, it might help to have kind of more informal settings in the beginning of such a consultation process that then have to become a little bit more formalized and, I guess, more goal-oriented over the course of time.
Yeah, if I may fill in a bit also. I think there are different factors here. One is that there needs to be training available. And that is, of course, something that the government need to do. But in order to get that training to work, you also need people that actually can manage to go through it, and that's where we have negotiated this study grant to empower people to be able to apply for those trainings. And what we do now as social partners is that we have a dialogue with the government on where to put the money. So if we see that, well, there needs to be more money spent on like shorter higher education passes for like engineers who was trained 10 or 15 years ago that need to do some shorter upskilling at the university, then there need to be such training available at university. And we also see that in vocational training, and that this has been, I would say, very successful. I wrote in the chat here that more than half of the applicants for the study grant is actually vocational training. And the average age of those applying is 45 years. So they have worked for a number of years and see that, well, in my profession, or if I want to change profession, I need to do some upskilling or reskilling. And many of those do it in vocational training. And that is our role as partners here, is that we sit down with the government and try to get them to put money where it's needed from our point of view.
Thank you, Johan. Liane or Ina, would you like to add anything on to what was mentioned?
I think it's very important to understand that challenges in different levels of education are quite related. If we struggle only with the challenges of vocational education, for example, insufficient number of those who are coming to vocational education and not with the general education that brings all these students to us, then you may miss a lot of content and possibilities to have these solutions for those problems which actually are on your table. So I think it is very important that the stakeholders understand that education is holistic and that our aim is to get the most skilled professional that we can have, and impacting every level, making and bringing more possibilities and results in these levels. I think it leads to that result, which is the aim of our work. Thank you.
I know, Laura, we're running out of time, so a very short plug-in. I think making content knowledge accessible, and examples, I'd say, a free learning management system. HP Foundation has a product called HP Life, which is a completely free learning management system that has courses in 8 different languages, around 36 courses on ways for you to upskill yourself on how to use AI or how to deal with social media or marketing and so on. So I'd say I'm posting this on the chat for people to look at it, but making it completely free and available, never going to be charged, so just making it accessible for everyone. I think that's part of it, regardless of higher education or vocation or not, making it fundamentally easily for people to absorb and be able to access. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Ina, and also for sharing those resources with our participants. And the last question, the closing one for the panel that I would like to pose to my colleague Andrew at the OECD. We have spoken about different kinds of stakeholders, and we do have representatives of different kinds of stakeholders, including social partners on this panel. But we have a question from one of our participants who is asking about the role of civil society in the stakeholder landscape. Would you like to reflect on this, Andrew?
Yes, that's a very good question. They're often forgotten in these dialogues, and I think that that's a very important role. Community sector organizations. I mean, when you're talking about working with those who sometimes need the most support, that are furthest away from the labor market. I mean, these are organizations, often mission-driven organizations, that work very closely and understand the barriers and enablers of people developing the skills that they need for the labor market or participation in society, for example. So having them part of the discussion and learning from them what the needs of those people are, I think is absolutely critical, and they need to be more integrated into these sorts of conversations, I believe. I'll just leave it at that because I know we're short of time.
Thank you, Andrew. That's great. So thank you, and thank you also to all our esteemed panelists for your really insightful reflections. Unfortunately, this brings us to the end of our webinar, but I would really like to thank everyone for joining us online, joining the discussion, for your questions today in the chat, but also those that you have shared with us prior to this event. And as Abby said in the presentation, governance of skills policies is an important topic that we at the OECD plan to continue working on. So if you would like to be part of our efforts, if you have further questions or thoughts or comments to share, or if you would just like to learn more about our work, please do not hesitate to use the contacts and resources that will shortly appear in the chat to get in touch. But for now, I'll leave it here. Thank you very much again, and have a great rest of the day. Goodbye.